Chapter 1. The Cold Case. Detective Sophia Harris had seen it all. With over a decade of experience in the police force, she had earned a reputation as one of the best investigators in the city. Her sharp mind and unwavering determination had solved countless high-profile cases, earning her respect from her colleagues and even the criminals she apprehended. But for all her success, Sophia couldn't shake the weight of the one case that had haunted her for years: the disappearance of Emily Monroe. Emily Monroe was a college student who had vanished without a trace 5 years ago. The case had initially seemed simple: a young woman running away from home, or possibly falling victim to a dangerous predator. But as Sophia dove deeper into the investigation, things didn't add up. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of abduction, and no ransom demand. It was as if Emily had simply disappeared into thin air. The case had gone cold, and for the last 2 years, Sophia had pushed it to the back of her mind. But every time she walked past the old file on her desk, the memory of Emily's haunting, missing face would resurface. It gnawed at her, pulling her back into the mystery she hadn't been able to solve. Sophia sat in her dimly lit office, reviewing the case files once more. The walls around her were covered with photographs of missing persons and unsolved crimes, reminders of the cases she had closed and the ones that still needed answers. Her eyes stopped on a photo of Emily Monroe, a smiling young woman with bright eyes and an infectious laugh. The image was outdated now, but it still held the same power it had when Sophia first saw it. The door to her office creaked open, and her partner, Detective Jake Thompson, stepped inside, looking tired but determined. "Still going over that Monroe case?" Jake asked, leaning against the doorframe. Sophia didn't look up from the files. "I can't let it go, Jake. Something about it doesn't sit right with me. I feel like we missed something small that could unravel the whole mystery." Jake sighed and sat down across from her. "You've been working on this case for years. Maybe it's time to let it go. We've got new cases coming in, and the department's already stretched thin." Sophia finally looked up, her eyes hardening with resolve. "I don't care if it's been 5 years, Jake. I made a promise to Emily's family. I'm not going to rest until I find out what happened to her, and I'm not going to let this case be forgotten like all the others." Jake watched her for a moment, his expression softening. He knew Sophia well enough to understand that when she set her mind to something, there was no stopping her. "All right," he said, pushing himself off the desk. "I'll help you, but you can't do this alone. We're a team." Sophia gave him a small, grateful smile. "I know. Thanks, Jake." She stood up, grabbing the file with Emily's name on it. "Let's start from the beginning. Maybe there's something we missed." As they delved deeper into the case, Sophia and Jake went over every detail again. Emily's life before she vanished, her relationships, her habits, and the people she knew. Emily had been a typical college student, bright, motivated, with a promising future ahead of her. She had no known enemies, no suspicious behavior. The night she disappeared, she had been at a party with friends. She left to walk home, but was never seen again. Sophia pulled up the list of people Emily had been in contact with that night: friends, classmates, and acquaintances. There was one name that stood out among the rest: Daniel Carter. Daniel was Emily's ex-boyfriend. Their relationship had ended amicably, according to those close to her. But something about Daniel's name on the list triggered something in Sophia's mind. He had always been quiet, a little too reserved, and when questioned by the police at the time, his answers had seemed rehearsed. Sophia decided to pay Daniel a visit. She needed to know if there was more to his story than he had let on. The next day, Sophia and Jake arrived at Daniel's apartment, a modest place in a quiet part of the city. Sophia knocked on the door, her hand steady, as she prepared herself for what was to come. After a long pause, the door creaked open, and Daniel stood before them. His appearance was unchanged since the last time Sophia had seen him. Short, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to avoid eye contact. He looked nervous, but not necessarily guilty. "Detective Harris," he said, his voice low. "Jake, what brings you here?" "We need to talk about Emily Monroe," Sophia replied, her tone firm. "It's been 5 years, Daniel. We're reopening the case, and I need your help." Daniel's face tightened, his eyes flickering with something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. "I've told you everything I know. I don't know what else I can say." Sophia wasn't convinced. "We've been through your statements, Daniel. You said you and Emily were on good terms, that she left the party and went home. But you never mentioned that you two argued that night. Why?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. "We did argue, but it wasn't anything serious. She was upset about some stuff, and I didn't know how to handle it, that's all." Sophia leaned in, her voice quiet but insistent. "Then why did you lie about it?" Daniel's eyes flickered up to meet hers, and for the first time he seemed to break. "I didn't want to seem like I had anything to do with it. I was scared of how people would look at me, how they would think I was involved somehow." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Scared of what?" Daniel hesitated, his hand trembling slightly. "I didn't hurt her, I swear, but I think I know who did." Chapter 2. The Unraveling Truth. Sophia's heart raced as she processed Daniel's words. He didn't just say he didn't hurt Emily. He was implying that someone else did, someone he knew. Jake stood beside her, watching Daniel closely, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Who are you talking about, Daniel?" Jake asked, his voice calm but firm. Daniel looked over his shoulder nervously, as if expecting someone to burst into the room at any moment. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's Mike Hargrave." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Mike Hargrave. The name didn't immediately ring any bells, but she quickly reviewed her memories of the case. Mike Hargrave was a local low-level drug dealer with a criminal history for assault and petty theft. He was the kind of guy who faded into the background, rarely making waves, but always lurking on the outskirts of trouble. "And why should we believe you now, Daniel?" Sophia pressed, her tone skeptical. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I saw them together the night Emily disappeared. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to be connected to anything bad. But I saw them arguing outside the party. Mike was angry, yelling at her. I don't know what happened after that, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't just a fight. I think Mike did something to her." Sophia exchanged a quick glance with Jake. This was a breakthrough, a lead they hadn't considered before. If Mike Hargrave was involved, they needed to find him, and fast. "You never mentioned this before, Daniel," Jake said. "Why come forward now?" I don't know. It's been eating me up inside, I guess. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to cause trouble. But now that I know you're reopening the case, I figured you should know." Daniel's voice trembled with guilt, but his eyes were steady. He was telling the truth, at least about this much. Sophia nodded, pulling out a notepad. Where can we find Mike Hargrave? I don't know exactly where he lives, but I know he hangs out at an old bar on the east side of town, the Rusty Barrel. He's probably there now, with his crew. Sophia stood up, glancing at Jake. Let's go. The Rusty Barrel was a dimly lit dive bar tucked away in one of the roughest parts of town. The scent of stale beer and smoke filled the air, and the patrons barely seemed to notice the two detectives entering. Sophia's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of Mike Hargrave. She spotted him in the back corner of the bar, sitting at a table with two other men who looked as rough around the edges as he did. Mike was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His dark eyes flickered up as they approached, and for a moment he froze. Sophia and Jake walked up to the table, the tension palpable. Mike Hargrave, Sophia said, her voice calm but commanding. We need to talk. Mike's expression shifted from nonchalance to wariness. He took a slow drag from his cigarette before crushing it in the ashtray. What do you want, officers? He asked, trying to sound uninterested, but his voice betrayed him. We're investigating the disappearance of Emily Monroe, Sophia replied, her gaze unwavering. We know you were involved, and we need you to tell us what happened. Mike's eyes darted around the room, and his hand instinctively moved to his waistband, where a gun might be tucked. But he didn't make a move to draw it. Sophia kept her distance, but her hand was ready at her side, prepared to act if necessary. You've got the wrong guy, Mike said, his voice growing more defensive. I don't know what happened to that girl. I don't even know who you're talking about. Sophia didn't believe him for a second. We know you were with her that night. You argued with her outside the party, Mike. People saw you. We know you had a temper. So, how about you stop lying and start telling the truth? Mike's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Sophia thought he might bolt. But then he slouched in his chair, his expression darkening. I didn't mean to hurt her, he muttered. I didn't know how far it was going to go. Sophia's pulse quickened. What happened? She demanded. Mike's voice was low, filled with regret. We were arguing. She was upset about something I didn't even understand. She wanted to get away from me, but I couldn't let her go. I was angry. I pushed her. I yelled at her, and I don't know, I just snapped. She fell, hit her head on the concrete. I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would happen. Jake's eyes darkened, but Sophia stayed focused, keeping her emotions in check. And then? She asked, her voice icy. I panicked, Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to do, so I took her. I took her somewhere no one would find her, and I left her there. I didn't think anyone would come looking for her. Sophia's blood ran cold. Where did you leave her, Mike? Mike shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room again. There's an old warehouse by the docks. It's abandoned. No one goes there. I left her there, and I thought that was it, that no one would ever find her. Sophia's mind was racing. This was it. They had the location. They had the confession. Jake, call it in, Sophia said, her voice firm. We're heading to the docks. As they sped toward the docks, Sophia's thoughts were a whirlwind. They had the chance to finally bring closure to Emily Monroe's family, to uncover the truth behind the young woman's disappearance. But in the back of her mind, Sophia couldn't shake the question. Had Mike Hargrave been telling the truth? Was Emily really there, at that warehouse? Or had there been another layer to the story they still hadn't uncovered? As they neared the warehouse, Sophia couldn't help but wonder if the case was truly coming to a close, or if it was just the beginning of something darker. Chapter 3. The docks, the drive to the docks, felt like it took forever. The cold wind had picked up, and the sky was an ominous shade of gray as Sophia and Jake pulled into the deserted area by the water. The docks were quiet, abandoned warehouses lining the coastline, the occasional flickering streetlight casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. Sophia's mind raced. The confession from Mike Hargrave had been shocking, but it raised even more questions. Was Emily really there? Had Mike's version of events been the whole story? The uncertainty gnawed at her as she got out of the car, pulling her coat tighter against the biting wind. "Stay close," Sophia said, her voice low as she glanced at Jake. "We don't know if Hargrave's telling the truth or if there's someone else involved. We'll clear the area first, and then we'll check the warehouse." Jake nodded, his expression focused. The two of them moved silently toward the first of the warehouses, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The place was old, the metal doors rusted, and the windows were boarded up. It was exactly the kind of place someone would use to hide something. Or someone. As they approached the large warehouse where Mike had claimed to leave Emily, Sophia's heart beat faster. She was close now, closer than she had ever been to solving this case. But there was still a sense of dread in her gut, a feeling that something wasn't right. Sophia pulled out her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. She gestured for Jake to move to the right side of the building while she checked the front. Together, they worked in tandem, circling the warehouse slowly, making sure no one else was around. It was as they reached the back of the warehouse that Sophia saw something. The metal door was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of light to break through. She motioned for Jake to stay back as she carefully approached the door, her hand resting on her gun, ready for whatever might come next. She pushed the door open slowly, the creaking sound loud in the stillness. The warehouse was dark, the smell of old wood and dust filling the air. As Sophia stepped inside, her flashlight scanned the area, revealing rows of crates and discarded furniture. But there, in the corner of the warehouse, something caught her attention. It was a pile of clothing, torn, dirty, and stained. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She stepped closer, shining the light over the clothes. And then, as her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw it. A body. A young woman, lifeless, lying motionless on the ground. Jake rushed in behind her, his face going pale when he saw the scene. "Is it her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia crouched down beside the body, her mind racing. She didn't need to check for identification. She knew it was Emily Monroe. The clothes matched the description from the night she disappeared. Her heart sank. Emily had been here all along, hidden in this forgotten place, left to die alone. Sophia took a deep breath and pulled out her phone, dialing for backup. "This is Detective Harris. We found the body. I need a team here now." As she waited for the other officers to arrive, Sophia's mind raced again. Mike Hargrave's confession seemed to hold some truth, but there was something else, something more sinister. Why had Emily been left here? Why hadn't Mike just taken her to the hospital or called for help? What was his true involvement? And then there was another thought that kept coming back to Sophia. Was Mike Hargrave the only one responsible for what had happened to Emily? Had someone else been behind it all? Sophia was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't hear Jake's voice behind her. "Sophia, you need to see this." She stood up quickly, moving over to where Jake was kneeling next to a table in the corner of the warehouse. On the table were several items, documents, photos, and what appeared to be a map. "What is this?" Sophia asked, her voice low as she picked up one of the photos. It was a picture of Emily, taken just days before her disappearance. But in the background of the photo, there was something strange, something Sophia hadn't noticed before. A shadowy figure, barely visible, standing just outside the frame, watching her. Sophia's stomach dropped. "We missed something," she whispered. This wasn't just about Mike Hargrave. As Jake looked over the map and the papers, he shook his head. "These are coordinates. Someone was keeping track of Emily. They knew exactly where she was at all times." Sophia's mind raced. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Emily had been followed, watched. Mike Hargrave might have been the one to push her, but someone else had orchestrated everything. They had known about Emily's movements, and they had planned for this. Mike had been just a pawn in a much larger scheme. "Call for forensic specialists," Sophia said, standing up. "We need to get these documents analyzed immediately. I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As the forensics team arrived and began processing the scene, Sophia stood at the edge of the warehouse, her mind whirling. She had come so close to solving this case, but it seemed that the answers she had found only raised more questions. Who was behind Emily's disappearance, and why? What was the significance of the shadowy figure in the photo? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this case wasn't just about Emily Monroe. It was something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Sophia knew that solving this case would require everything she had. She would have to dig deeper than ever before, into the darkest corners of the city, into the lives of people who had hidden their secrets for too long. And she would do whatever it took to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. As the sun began to rise over the docks, Sophia made a silent vow to herself. She would find the answers. She would find the people responsible for Emily's death, and she would bring them to justice. This case wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Silent Puppeteers. The following morning, Sophia stood at the edge of the crime scene, watching as the forensic team worked meticulously. The chill of the early morning air did nothing to ease the growing tension inside her. The more they uncovered, the darker the case became. And the shadows in the photos, the strange figure watching Emily, haunted her every thought. Jake had called in additional resources, and Sophia's phone buzzed with updates from the lab. The documents they had found in the warehouse had been analyzed. The coordinates pointed to multiple locations, and the photos were confirmed to be linked to a series of mysterious surveillance shots taken over the past few weeks. Someone had been watching Emily for far longer than anyone had suspected. Sophia rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the case pressing down on her. They were no longer looking at a simple missing persons case. This had escalated into something much larger. It was becoming clear that Emily's death was part of a twisted game, one that had been orchestrated by someone with deep knowledge of her life. She walked over to where Jake was talking to one of the forensic specialists. "Anything new?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her mind. Jake looked up, his face grim. They've finished analyzing the documents we found. It's not just random surveillance. These papers point to a group, Sophia. There's a network involved. Whoever's behind this has been operating in the shadows for a long time. Sophia's pulse quickened. A group? Who are they? What's their connection to Emily? Jake handed her a folder, and she quickly scanned through the pages. The information was chilling. There were names, dates, and locations. At the top of the list was an organization with ties to illegal activity, though no one had ever been able to connect the dots. The group, codenamed the Silent Puppeteers, had a reputation for controlling people from behind the scenes, pulling strings without ever showing their faces. These people have been manipulating events for years, pulling people into their schemes, using them, and then discarding them when they're no longer useful. Jake explained, his voice tight. They're dangerous, Sophia, and they don't care who gets hurt along the way. Sophia's mind raced as she digested the information. Emily had unknowingly become a pawn in their game. But why? What had Emily known, or what had she gotten herself mixed up in, that made her a target for the Silent Puppeteers? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see a young officer approaching, a look of urgency on his face. Detective Harris, the officer said out of breath. We've got something. Surveillance footage just came in from a nearby business. It's from the night Emily disappeared. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Where is it? Let's go. The officer led them to a small office where they could view the footage on a computer screen. The grainy video showed a dark figure walking through the alley near the party where Emily had last been seen. It was hard to make out any distinguishing features, but as the figure approached the streetlight, the unmistakable shape of Emily's form appeared. She was walking toward the alley, but she didn't seem like she was running from anyone. In fact, she looked almost calm, too calm for someone who had been in a confrontation moments earlier. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Who's that with her? The figure walking beside Emily wasn't immediately visible on the footage, but as the camera adjusted to the light, a face appeared for a split second. It was a man, tall, with dark hair and a sharp jawline. He was walking beside Emily as if they were in conversation, and from the way they were moving, it looked like they were both heading to the same destination. Freeze it right there, Sophia ordered. The image of the man was still blurry, but it was enough. Sophia knew this wasn't just another random passerby. This man was involved, and he was connected to the night Emily disappeared. We need to find out who he is, Jake said, his voice grim. This could be the key to everything. Sophia nodded, already making plans in her head. Let's get the best tech experts on this. We need to enhance this footage and run facial recognition. We need to know who this man is, and fast. As the team worked on the footage, Sophia couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were about to uncover something far bigger than they'd anticipated. The Silent Puppeteers weren't just manipulating the people involved. They were pulling strings at a level Sophia hadn't seen before. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Hours later, they received a breakthrough. The facial recognition software had returned a match. The man in the footage was none other than Victor Sutherland, a known associate of several powerful criminal organizations. His name had popped up in various investigations, but he had always managed to stay one step ahead of the law. Victor Sutherland, Sophia muttered under her breath. Of course. Jake glanced at her. You've heard of him? Sophia nodded. He's connected to a variety of illegal activities, money laundering, arms dealing, even human trafficking. But he's always been untouchable. He's too careful, too connected. No one's ever been able to get close enough to take him down. Until now, Jake said, his eyes hardening. We've got him on camera. He's linked to Emily's disappearance. This is our chance. Sophia's mind was already racing ahead. They had the footage, they had a name, and they had the first solid lead in a case that had seemed impossible just a few days ago. But she knew this wouldn't be easy. Victor Sutherland wasn't a man who would give up easily. We need to move quickly, Sophia said, determination in her voice. Victor Sutherland is dangerous, and if he's behind Emily's death, we need to bring him in before he can disappear again. Jake nodded. Let's do it. The clock was ticking, and Sophia knew that time was running out. The investigation had taken a dark turn, but there was no turning back now. She had a lead, one that could unravel the entire criminal network that had been operating in the shadows for years. Victor Sutherland wouldn't be easy to catch, but Sophia was determined. She had seen enough death, enough darkness, to know that she couldn't stop now. She would follow this trail wherever it led, even if it meant putting herself in the line of fire. Chapter 5. The Final Move. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every waking moment was consumed with planning and strategizing. Sophia couldn't allow herself to rest, not when they were so close to the truth. The discovery of Victor Sutherland's involvement in Emily's disappearance had opened a new chapter in the case, one that was as dangerous as it was urgent. Sophia's team had been working around the clock to track Sutherland's movements. They had put his name in every database, checked his phone records, and even managed to track his vehicle using traffic camera footage. It was clear that Sutherland was aware of their investigation. He was cautious, always staying 2 steps ahead. But Sophia had always been good at reading people, and she had a feeling that they were getting closer. Sutherland's arrogance, his tendency to overestimate his own power, was his weakness. Sophia was counting on it. One night, as Sophia sat at her desk, she received a call from Jake. His voice was tight, urgent. Sophia, you need to come to the warehouse, now. Without hesitation, Sophia grabbed her coat and rushed out of the precinct. Her heart was already racing by the time she reached her car. She had a sinking feeling that tonight would be the night that everything would come to a head. When Sophia arrived at the warehouse, she saw Jake standing by the entrance, his face grim. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping out of the car. Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to follow him inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, the cold air heavy with tension. Sophia's instincts were on high alert as she followed Jake through the rows of crates and metal shelves. In the back of the warehouse, there was a small office. Inside, a team of officers was gathered around a table, their eyes focused on a set of photos and documents. Sophia's gaze immediately landed on the image at the center of the table. "Victor, what's the deal with this?" Sophia asked, her voice low. Jake stepped forward, holding a folder in his hands. "We've been monitoring his known associates. One of them, a guy named Leonard Griggs, has been spotted frequently at this warehouse. Griggs is a former associate of Sutherland's, but he's been laying low for a while. We think Sutherland may have come to meet him here." Sophia felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. the connection they had been waiting for. "We're close," she said, determination in her voice. "Let's move." Sophia's team had set up a perimeter around the warehouse. As they prepared to move in, she found herself once again facing the fact that their target, Victor Sutherland, was not just a criminal. He was a mastermind. Every moment they wasted could be a moment he used to slip away. The plan was simple. Move in fast, surround the building, and capture Sutherland and anyone else inside. Sophia knew that time was of the essence. If they waited too long, Sutherland could disappear like he always did. She signaled to her team, "On my count. 3, 2, 1, go!" The officers rushed forward, their footsteps swift and precise. Sophia led the charge, her hand gripping her gun as they made their way to the back of the building. The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the soft sound of footsteps echoing off the walls. They reached the office, and Sophia motioned for her team to hold back. She could feel the presence of something or someone on the other side of the door. Slowly, she inched the door open. The room was empty, but Sophia knew that Sutherland wasn't far. She could feel his presence lurking nearby, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Just as she was about to signal to the team to move out, a voice cut through the silence. "Looking for someone?" Sophia's heart stopped. She spun around to face the man standing in the doorway. There he was, Victor Sutherland. His cold eyes locked onto hers, and for a split second, it felt like the world stood still. Sutherland's lips curled into a sinister smile. "You're too late, Detective. You've been chasing ghosts." Sophia didn't hesitate. She raised her gun, her stance solid and unwavering. "You're under arrest, Victor." But Sutherland didn't move. Instead, he raised his hand slowly, mockingly. "You think you've won? Do you think capturing me will end it all?" Sophia didn't flinch. "I'll make sure it ends for you." Sutherland's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You think you know everything, Detective, but you don't. You've uncovered a small piece of a much larger puzzle. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Save it, Sutherland. You're going to rot in prison for the rest of your life. We've got everything we need." For a brief moment, Sophia saw the flicker of uncertainty in Sutherland's eyes. He knew he was trapped, but he wasn't done yet. He had one last card to play. Before Sophia could react, Sutherland lunged toward the door, his movements fast and desperate, but she was ready. She raised her gun and fired a warning shot, the sound deafening in the stillness of the warehouse. "Stay where you are," she shouted. Sutherland froze, his hand gripping the doorknob. He hesitated, then slowly turned around, his face dark with frustration. "You don't know what you've started," he spat, his voice laced with venom. Sophia stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "It's over, Victor. You'll never hurt anyone again." With a defeated sigh, Sutherland lowered his hands, his face a mask of anger and defeat. "We'll see about that." In the hours that followed, Sophia watched as Sutherland was taken into custody, his once confident demeanor now shattered. She knew that the case wasn't over yet. Sutherland was just one piece of a much larger network, and there were still unanswered questions. But for now, she had taken down the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. As she stood in the warehouse, staring at the empty space where Sutherland had once stood, Sophia knew that this case had changed her. It had tested her in ways she never imagined, but it had also given her something more important, a reminder of why she chose this life: to protect, to fight for justice, to make sure that no one else would ever suffer the way Emily Monroe had. And she wouldn't stop until every last piece of the silent puppeteers was brought to light. Sophia Harris wasn't just a detective. She was a force to be reckoned with.